Nice coat on it.
Football in Focus, teed up indoors on Battleground. Good to have you along on the show tonight. Got Bryant Roche back with us, coming back in from last week's holiday football time. And Grimsley went down to Weddington, and they went down there and they dropped the game to Weddington. What did you see? Why do you think Grimsley dropped that game? What was the reason behind Grimsley losing the ball game? What caused the Whirlies to get stopped by Weddington? Kind of your observations on that game.
I think being honest, I think the biggest surprise for me was how well Weddington's offensive line did against Grimsley's defensive line. Grimsley really throughout the year had done pretty well against the run. Maybe we saw some chinks in the armor against Sun Valley and maybe a little bit against Huff, but overall they've done really well against the run. And I got to tell you, Weddington, they were down 20-14 at half. Had a couple big runs in the second half, a 52-yarder that I believe Mr. Fanning just talked about. And I think really when Weddington got up a couple scores, that was probably the first time, and I've covered Grimsley several times.
You've been with them pretty close.
Yeah. I've covered them several times. That was the first time that I remember looking at that sideline and just feeling that mood. I mean, even when they were down against Huff, I didn't really feel it, but I felt the mood honestly change when Weddington got ahead a couple scores. Probably the first time I had seen it all season.
Overall, what did Weddington stop that Grimsley was trying to do? What did Weddington stop?
I think the biggest thing for them is once they got ahead, Grimsley kind of gave up on the run, and honestly, Summers had a pretty good game. He really did. 3 touchdowns in the first half, and he didn't even touch the ball in the fourth quarter, apart from a screen pass that he caught that I recall. But in the fourth quarter, he had 0 carries, but he still had well over 100 yards in the game. Had a highlight reel 29-yarder, I think I had him for in the first half. But I think the biggest thing is Grimsley is at their best when they're balanced and effective running and passing. And I felt like once they got behind, it sort of became desperation mode, throwing the ball downfield. And I think that played into Weddington's hands when they became more of a one-dimensional football team.
What about that Weddington running game? Did that kind of surprise you any? Because they had success with the run. They scrapped the pass. We talked about with Mike. Scrapped the pass with the run. Did that kind of get your attention?
That was the biggest surprise of the game for me, was how well Weddington's offensive line did. Grimsley, like I said before, really good up front defensively throughout this season. But I got to give a tip of the cap to that Weddington offensive line.
Now, you've been there before yourself. You've been part of the offensive and defensive lines. You know what that's like up front.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, Weddington didn't do anything fancy.
Straight ahead?
They really did. It was base blocking. I didn't see a whole lot of movement, didn't see pullers, trap plays, anything. I just think that was a good old-fashioned,
grounded out.
Yeah,
big runs?
They just had
big runs?
They did. They had a couple big ones.
You mentioned that 52-yarder was big, right?
Yeah, they had a 52-yarder. I think I had them for about a 30-something yarder at one point in the game too. I mean, those 2 big runs were pretty crippling, I thought, for Grimsley. And
what was the coach's mood around the coaching staff? After you talked to the coaches, I'm sure Darryl Brown. What were they feeling after that game? What was it like for them? I know the kids were down. Everybody was down. What about the coaches? How'd they handle it, you felt like?
I did have a chance to talk to Darryl Brown afterward. He kind of saw what I saw. He said he felt like they just beat us up front, beat us at the point of attack. But I think he did reflect back on it and say, this team...
Lou?
This team's only lost twice. This team's only lost twice, and I'm not counting the the new game that the title game that got vacated.
Thank you. Hey, you're rolling fine, Mr. Atmore checking in. He's on the line. Now you're on the line too.
There you go.
And I know you've been on the line many times. But I'm thinking about that Grimsley game. All that happened last Friday night. What about for the future? How do you see Grimsley for next year? I mean, they got Summers coming back. They've got Faison Brandon coming back. They've got some other guys. What about the future of Grimsley football? Is it in good hands, safe and secure?
That's a very interesting thought. I'm kind of curious to see what they will look like next year. They lose the two main receivers, Taylor and Anderson, who are pretty big parts of that team. Mm-hmm. They lose 3 senior offensive linemen that I think is more of a loss than what people are, saying. I think that'll be significant.
That'll probably be seen more as you get into next year than it is now. Yeah, next year.
I think if I had to say a question mark, that might be my biggest one, is what does the offensive line look like? And then you said Brandon, like you said, Brandon's coming back, Summers is coming back. On defense, they have a few secondary guys that they're losing. Kind of curious to see what that secondary looks like. Sellers gone, McLaughlin gone, Jamari Davis gone.
Player, yeah. There's some work to be done back there.
So there's going to be some guys they've got to replace. We'll see how that looks. They'll still have some talent on the field. But yeah, it'll be interesting. And then the other thing, kind of the elephant in the room, is Bryce Davis, his rehab. I think you can make a good argument that he was the best football player, on that football team and one of the best in the area at large. And they really only got a game and some change out of him. So I think Bryce Davis, that's kind of the elephant in the room, is, him coming back, and they definitely would like to have him back. He's a good football player.
Let's go to Dudley right quick. Dudley versus Mount Tabor. Take us back to August. You were there for that game. That was at scrimmage. What did you see from the Dudley team on that afternoon?
I gotta tell you, I think that scrimmage, I'm usually not someone that takes much stock in a scrimmage game. I thought on that particular day that Tabor, ran the ball effectively and did really well defensively against Dudley. But I gotta tell you, I think looking back on it, I think it was an early season scrimmage. I think there were kinks that were getting out a little bit for Dudley. And I think, being honest with you, if we rolled that again, if we did that again, I'm not sure that we get the same result the second time.
Think about it. That was probably good, very good for Dudley that day. Probably an eye-opener for Dudley we got to work on,
I think maybe it was a wake-up call. Yeah. It could have been a little wake-up call. The offense, I think with some new guys getting integrated, maybe wasn't fully, clicking yet. Mm-hmm. But once the actual season started, a little bit of a slow start against Page maybe.
Let's ask you about that game. Let's go back to the first quarter against Page and think about that start they had against Page and how things changed once they headed towards the second quarter, about a minute and a half in. We talked about that before, a little bit.
Yeah, I think, once Atmore came on the scene, and I don't know if it was just that little juice coming in with Atmore, but the offense hasn't had any problems since then, and that offense, they've been as dominant as anybody this season, and Atmore's been as good as anybody at quarterback.
You've had fun probably just tracking his numbers this year, keeping up with the numbers.
Yeah, we came out with an article a little bit ago that kind of looked at some of the records that he has already broken, and some of the records that are kind of at play, in terms of him. And I actually see him over there at the other side of the this facility here. But but it's just been a remarkable thing what he's been able to do, and I think for him this season has definitely been special. And I got to tell you, if there was a college coach that's watching this program today, his recruitment maybe hasn't taken off as much. But if anybody cares about my opinion, I think you need to look at this kid's tape. And if you want to, say what you want about my opinion, I've been around the block a few times. played at the college level, have covered the game at the college level. This guy Atmore, I think you should take a look at this kid.
NC loses Austin Hooker this week, transfer portal. Why not go ahead and jump on Atmore and bring him to A&T, HBCU, put him in there and let him go to work. A&T just had problems deciding who the quarterback's going to be the past year. You covered them. They've had all kinds of quarterback problems.
Unfortunately, they have. They've started 3 different kids, or they did start 3 different kids. I mean, went 1-10, worst record since 2010. Offensive coordinator Chris Young has just, been announced as no longer being the offensive coordinator. Hooker really didn't even get a chance to play.
If he got more of a chance, he could have done a whole lot more, I think.
Who knows what would happen, but Hooker...
And now he's gone.
I mean, for him to lose A&T, I think is pretty significant because he's got family roots.
Oh, yeah.
With his father. His father having
and his uncle,
there.
too. Ed was there. His uncle's dead now. Ed passed away. It was a great man. Ed Hooker, defensive back.
Yeah, that's a blow to Aggie pride there, I feel.
That kind of hurts the Aggie pride a little bit. Kind of cuts into it. Back to Dudley. Let's talk about those receivers. As far as a group goes, I mean, there's some strong individual receivers out there around the area. Man, there's some real good receivers. But as far as a group goes, there's not much of a better group of receivers than what Dudley has out there. That group of 3 and sometimes even 4, you include Antonio Lee, jump him in there too. That's a group of very good receivers.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. You want to call that the trio or the triumvirate? I don't know. But, it's a great core.
Call it the triad.
Call it the triad.
How about that?
Yeah, you got Newkirk, Neely and Bartley. And don't forget also, I think what people sometimes don't realize, that offensive line, what they do up front, it not only opens up the running game, they've got a really good zone rushing attack and a really good RPO off of that. But what can happen sometimes when the defense, what they're looking for, they're trying to make sure they don't get reached by those offensive linemen on the zone. But what can sometimes happen when they over-pursue a little bit, get a little aggressive, that screen game becomes all the more useful. And they've got some good backs.
Look out for L.J. Southern and Jaden Brown. They're as good as any receivers around. Plus, Southern also plays some more defense. He's been doing defense lately, too.
Yeah, a nice little interception. Yep.
And you think about the offensive line, it's important, too, because so many times Dudley decides to go to that empty backfield. You got 5 guys in the pass route, you got an empty backfield. Those linemen really have to step up then. Yeah. No protection quarterback except for those linemen. That's it.
I know you're a music guy, running on empty.
Oh, I've run that one a few times. When I'm out there running in the mornings, that song has played through my mind many a time. And we also got the tune "The Long Run" was always a big one too from the Eagles back in the day.
And Dudley, they've had a lot of long runs this year too.
Yeah, big plays in chunks. I mean, those new terms, chunks. They've had the big plays. They've had the chunks.
Ain't that the truth?
Boy, you gotta like what those guys have done. And on defense, I mentioned some names like, well, first of all, Samad Bell leads the state in sacks with 17. That says a lot right there.
Yeah, Samad Bell, I mean, I really liked what I saw. I remember watching him against Smith, and he had a thunderous hit in the backfield that I think I still hear from Tarpley. He's an aggressive ball player. They run a 4-3 front, and, he's a true hand-in-the-dirt guy coming off the edge. But he's aggressive, he's physical, and you couple that with a couple really good interior guys also.
That Ratliff and Brown are as big as they come around. Whew.
You don't really have a place you can run, but you can't hide against that.
And the other side, Ishmael Monde is a true athlete because he plays basketball too. He's got that athletic ability, skill. I mean, to me, he seemed like a defensive back, but he's a defensive end. Really good to have a guy like that up front too. Yeah, it's one of those things where when you have guys at all, right side, left side, middle, I mean, it's kind of like a lot of people talk about pick your poison on offense, but when it comes to their defense, there aren't too many holes in that defense as well. And I also really like how their linebackers are able to identify and,
play sound gap defense as well. I know you've had some of the linebackers here, Wilson on the program a little while back.
Latrell Wilson, Cameron Baldwin, also very good ones. And you add in that sophomore, Robert McCollum, has had several big picks this year. And DJ Parker is another. Seems like a defensive back to me, too. He's like a linebacker now, roving the field. DJ Parker, number 6 for Dudley, just gets everywhere and gets the job done.
Yeah, really good secondary also. I mean, really at all levels.
Well, the secondary kind of becomes, they put the skill players out there. You put Bartley, you put Newkirk. He had 12 tackles last week. You put Sophie Namaru, an outstanding defensive back also, plus L.J. Southern playing defensive back some now too. Just put the best guys out there and let them play. And you got some subs coming in doing well also.
Yeah, I really apologize, but I don't know how to pronounce his name.
Sophie Namaru?
Amaru. He had a really nice pick 6 that I saw on tape. Really jumped that route well.
Smooth sideline return.
And he's got some length on him too. I've seen him live as well. He's a solid maybe 6'2",
6'3", yeah.
Nice length, got some good arms. I really like what I saw on that kid.
And you'll get to see him tomorrow night, right? You'll be there?
Yes, I will be over at Hickory, making the trip down, and I don't know, what do you think, about an hour and a half road trip?
Hour and a half is what they say, yeah, about an hour and a half, yeah. Head up there, I'm going to leave out of town about that time, get there and see what's going on. Hopefully get in there, check out the Tornadoes and see Coach Joe Glass, maybe not.
Yeah, and a local connection, by the way. A former Eastern Guilford coach, and I might add he had a 10-3 campaign in 2018, so he's had some success, although has never actually faced Stephen Davis and Dudley apart from...
Wasn't in the conference together that time.
In a real game.
In the first West Regional game, final game, I think, for Hickory since 1996. Hadn't been in the West Regional Final since back in those days.
That's their only state championship in their history. They've never been to one before, never been since. They're hoping to change that narrative. Meanwhile, Dudley is looking to make a return trip after winning just 2 seasons ago, and they're looking for their 6th NCHSAA, 8th overall if you count pre-NCHSAA days. So a lot of history on the line here.
A lot of history on the line, a lot of cars on the road tomorrow night going up to Hickory. We'll be checking the ball game out up there on Greensboro Sports Radio. And GSO tomorrow night, going to be Greensboro.com. Going to be Bryant Roche will be there checking the game out, writing about the game after the game, and also going to have his takeaways when the game's over. Go to Greensboro.com. Sometimes they put Greensboro Sports across your headline. Say, they like Greensboro Sports. They like it. They're using it. That's good.
Maybe so.
You got to love it. Anyway, great job as always. Good to see you.
Oh, man, I always appreciate you, Mr.
Always good to have you in here, my man, with the best around. Brian Roche getting the job done here and every day. And we'll take a break, come back with Drew Atmore next. Andrew Atmore II on Football in Focus from Teed Up Indoors on Battleground. Back after this.